Hey guys, before tonight's journey begins, take a moment to settle in. Find the position your body wants to rest in. Loosen anything that feels tight. Let your shoulders drop and let the day you have carried begin to set itself down. Tonight we are spending a single evening inside a great house in England, from the first candle lit at a dressing table to the last carriage, waiting in the dark. There is nothing here you need to follow closely. The story moves at the pace of breathing, and it is meant to carry you gently towards sleep. If these quiet journeys help you rest, you are warmly welcome to follow the channel, so that another evening like this one can find you when you need it. A quiet like, or a few words left below about where you are listening from tonight, helps others discover these stories too. There is no hurry to do any of it. It can wait until morning, or it can wait forever. None of it asks anything of you now. For now, there is only this, the warmth around you, the slow settling of the night, a long, gentle story waiting to begin. So let your eyes close if they wish to, let your breathing slow, and when you are ready, we will settle by a mirror in a quiet upstairs room, while the candles are still being lit. It's the second week of January in the year 1860, in a small English town called Brentmere, and the cold has settled into everything, into the window glass, into the iron of the gate, into the hem of a dress that's been hanging all week by a fire, waiting for tonight. There's a house at the end of the lane with too many windows lit. That's Carrick Court, and tonight, every one of those windows is going to burn until 3 in the morning. I want you to stand with me a moment before we go in, because from out here, on the gravel, it looks simple. A house, a party, some music, people eating well and dancing and going home, but there's a whole invisible machinery running underneath this evening, and almost nobody inside is going to name it out loud. Every step from the front door to the last carriage has a rule attached to it. Which arm you take, how long you speak to the woman who invited you, whether you may cross a room by yourself, what you do with a knife, what you do with a bread roll, whether you may refuse to dance, and what happens to you if you refuse badly. None of it's written on the walls, it's all just known. And there's a young woman upstairs right now in a room we can't see into yet, who has spent most of her 22 years learning it, the way you'd learn to walk on ice. Her name's Beatrice Amberley. She'll be fine tonight mostly. That's not the story. There's no disaster waiting at the bottom of the stairs. But think about it for a second. Think about walking into a room where every small thing you do is being read. Not cruelly, not by enemies, by perfectly kind people over glasses of water in the friendliest possible way, and read all the same. Where the way you step down out of a carriage might follow you around for years afterward. Where you're expected to be pleasant and useful and never once look like you're trying. If that were you, if you had one evening, one dress, one set of white gloves, and 100 small rules you had to carry through it without ever appearing to think about them, how tired would you be by midnight? I've been reading a book that lists them. All of them. Every rule. It was printed in 1860 for young women exactly like Beatrice, and it's very calm about it, and very thorough, and it never once apologises for how much it's asking. It tells you which glass. It tells you which hand. It tells you that you must not, under any circumstances, put cake in your pocket. We're going to walk the whole night, you and I, from the mirror upstairs to the last cold breath on the gravel. The candles, the carriage, the door, the dressing room, the drawing room before the food comes, which is the hardest part, though nobody says so. Then the table, and everything that happens on it. Then the withdrawing. Then the floor waxed for dancing, and the music coming out from behind a wall of flowers. Nothing bad happens. I promise you that now, so you can stop bracing for it. This is just an evening. Long, warm, lit, exhausting, and gone by a morning. So let's go up. Let's find the room where the candles are being lit, and the dress that's been waiting all week, and a girl looking at herself in the glass deciding whether she'll do. The card came 8 days ago, and it's still sitting on the little table by the window, propped against a china dish, where Beatrice can see it from the bed. It's not much to look at. A stiff rectangle, cream-coloured, the ink brown-black and beginning to feel like part of the paper rather than something laid on top of it. Mrs. Carrick's compliments to Miss Amberley, and would she give the pleasure of her company on Wednesday evening, the 11th, at 8 o'clock. Dancing. An early answer would be a favour. That's all it says. A date, an hour, a single word about what will happen, and a polite little push to answer quickly. And it did push her. She answered it the same afternoon, which is the correct thing to do, and there's a reason for that beyond mere eagerness. A hostess planning an evening has to know her numbers. She has to know how many chairs, how many supper plates, how many pairs of hands to hire for the night. Every guest who dawdles over a reply is a guest who's making somebody else's arithmetic impossible. So you write back at once, that's the rule, and unlike a great many of the rules, this one is simply kind. She wrote it standing up at the writing desk in the front room with her aunt hovering somewhere behind her, pretending not to hover. Miss Amberley, it said, is very happy to accept the kind invitation of Mrs. Carrick for Wednesday. Third person. Not a word more than needed. Sealed, addressed, sent off with the boy, and then 8 days of waiting. And the single word on the card, dancing, Mahal, did more work than you'd think. It told her, without telling her exactly what to put on, not a small evening of reading aloud, not a musical night among a dozen friends where a heavier silk would have done. Dancing meant a full toilette. Dancing meant white. If Mrs. Carrick had wanted something quieter, she'd have said so in the invitation, and said how many were coming, so that nobody arrived in the wrong armour. To turn up too grand is as bad as turning up too plain, and both are miserable, and both are avoidable if the hostess simply says what she means on a piece of card. So she does. One word, and a young woman in another house reads it and knows what her week is going to look like. 8 days is a long time to look at a card. The dress has been hanging by the fire since Sunday, not close enough to scorch, just close enough that the damp of an English January can't get into it and leave it heavy and sour, the way it will if you leave a good dress folded in a drawer through a wet winter. It hangs from a loop sewn inside the waistband, skirt turned inside out, the bodice tucked down inside the skirt, which is how you hang a dress you care about, so that the outer surface never rubs against anything and the folds fall where they were meant to fall. Her mother taught her that, and her mother's mother taught her mother, and nobody in the house has ever written it down. It's white. Of course it's white. A young woman going to a ball wears white, or something so pale it may as well be. And there's not a great deal of argument to be had about it. Thin stuff over a silk lining. Tarlatan, or something near it. The kind of fabric that has no real weight at all, that lifts when you turn and settles a half second after you've stopped. Satin would be wrong. Velvet would be badly wrong. Those belong to married women, to women who have come out the other side of all this, and no longer have to prove anything by looking light. The girl of 22 who came down in heavy velvet would be telling the room something about herself, and it would not be a thing she meant to say. Nellie's here now, and the candles are going in one by one along the mantel and on the little table under the mirror. I want you to notice the light, because we're going to lose it if we're not careful. It's not electric light. It's not gas. Not up here. Not in a room like this, in a house like this. It's flame. 6 or 7 flames, small, low, moving, which means everything in this room is slightly unsteady. The shadow under Beatrice's jaw shifts a little when someone walks past. The white of the dress isn't white. It's a warm, buttery, faintly gold white, the colour of the inside of a nut. Her skin looks better in it than it does in daylight. And she knows this. And so does every woman who has ever dressed for an evening by candlelight and then met herself in a window the next morning. The order of it goes like this. Underclothes first, and they have to fit all of them, every layer, because a wrinkle 3 layers down will show up as a crease in the silk on top, and a badly fitting corset will make the whole dress sit wrong, no matter how well it was cut. Nothing about this is guessed at. The whole thing is engineering. Then the stockings, then the boots, because it's a great deal easier to do boots before you've got a skirt in the way. The boots are satin. They have to be. Satin, and nothing else, for a floor that's been waxed to a shine, and the colour's allowed to be white or black or whatever the gown is, and that's the whole of the choice. Beatrice's are white, which is the most correct thing the girl can put on her feet, though she's heard more than once that black flatters a foot better. She's thought about this a great deal more than she'd ever admit to anybody. She's chosen white. Then the skirt lifted over her head by Nellie with both arms up and Beatrice with her own arms up too and her eyes shut, and for a second and a half the whole world is nothing but muffled fabric and the smell of clean linen and a fire somewhere below. Then it's over her and down and she can see again. And now the long part. The hooks. Nellie works from the bottom up, and she doesn't talk while she does it, and Beatrice stands very straight and looks at the wall and doesn't talk either. There's a rhythm to it. A small metal click, a pause, a click. It takes as long as it takes. You could get impatient about this if you were a certain sort of person, but Beatrice isn't. And anyway, there is nowhere at all to be in a hurry to. I like this part, honestly. I don't know why. Two women in a cold room, one of them doing something careful with her hands and the other one standing still and letting her. Nobody performing, nobody being clever. Just the small sound of the hooks and the fire making its noise in the grate and the candles pulling themselves upright again after somebody moves. There's something in that the last quiet moment of an evening like this comes before the evening. Once she's downstairs, once she's in the carriage, there won't be a single hour until 3 in the morning when she isn't being seen by somebody. This is it. This is the last of her own company she'll have. Now, the hair. And this, of all the things in this room, is the one that actually frightens her a little. Though frightened is far too strong a word and she'd never use it. Hair has to be fastened. Not arranged, fastened. There's no rule more practically urgent in the whole business of dressing for a ball than this one. And it's practical for a reason that anybody can understand. Rooms get hot, dancing is dancing, and a coiffure that comes loose in the middle of a crowded floor is a small catastrophe you cannot walk away from. It happens. It has happened to women she knows. And the humiliation of it isn't the hair itself, is that you have to keep dancing. So Nellie pins it again, and Beatrice sits and lets her. And the pins go in with that small sound that pins make against the skull, not quite a scrape and not quite a tap. There are a great many of them. Later, taking them out will take almost as long as putting them in, and she'll do that part herself, half asleep dropping them one by one into a saucer at 2 in the morning. Flowers in the hair or ribbon. Not feathers. Feathers are for married women, and a girl who put feathers in her hair at 22 would be reaching for something she hasn't got yet. Beatrice has ribbon and a few small white flowers that have been kept in a cold room since yesterday and are only just beginning to give up. Almost no jewellery. That's the rule and she keeps to it, though she keeps to it easily, because she hasn't got much. Something very small at the throat. That's all a young woman ought to wear, and there's a whole philosophy hiding underneath that instruction, which is that ornament is for people who've arrived somewhere. And she hasn't arrived anywhere yet. She's still being looked at. Being looked at and being decorated are two different activities, and you're not supposed to be doing both. Here's what stays with me about all of this. There's a line in this book I've been reading, the one that lists all these rules, page after page, in the calmest voice you ever heard, and the line says that a lady is best dressed when you can't afterwards remember a single thing she was wearing. Think about that for a minute. Think about what it's actually asking. It means the whole point of the last 2 hours in this room, the hooks, the pins, the flowers kept cold since yesterday, the boots chosen over other boots after a good deal of private agonising. The whole point of it is to produce something that leaves no trace in anybody's memory. Not to be striking, not to be admired for the dress, to be so completely in harmony, so entirely without a single loud note anywhere, that a person could talk to her for 20 minutes and afterwards be unable to say what colour she was in. That's an enormous amount of labour in the service of not being noticed. And you could call it cruel, and I suppose in some moods I would, but there's another way to hear it, and I keep circling back to it. What it's really saying is that the dress must not be louder than the woman, that nothing on her ought to be doing the talking for her, and when you put it that way, when you take it out of 1860 and just hold it in your hand, it stops sounding like a cage, and starts sounding almost like a kindness. Somebody was trying to tell her, you are the point, not the silk. I don't know whether she'd have heard it that way. Probably not, standing here in the cold with her arms held out. The gloves come last, or nearly last. White kid, long, trimmed at the top, and they go on with a particular kind of patience. Fingers first, then the long, slow work up the arm, and the skin of the glove is cool and slightly damp feeling before it warms to her. She'll wear them almost all night. Not at dinner. Gloves came off at table years ago and haven't come back. But in the ballroom, yes, and in the carriage, and at the door. A fan, a handkerchief with lace on it folded small, and a pincushion, which she puts in her pocket, and which is the most useful and least romantic object she will carry all evening. The pincushion is there because of the napkin. At dinner, a woman in silk who simply lays a napkin across her lap is a woman who will spend the second half of the meal quietly watching it slide toward the floor. Silk is silk, nothing stays on it, so you pin the napkin at your belt, quietly, without making a performance of it so that nobody at the table sees you doing it, and you eat the whole dinner with your dress protected and your dignity intact. It's such a small, practical, unglamorous piece of cunning. It's the kind of thing that gets passed from a woman to her daughter and never appears in any painting of the period. Which is what I love about it, really. Every grand evening in history has a pincushion in it somewhere. The whole shining apparatus rests, at some point, on somebody remembering to bring pins. Her aunt will go with her. That isn't affection, or not only affection, it's the rule, and it's not a soft one. A young woman does not go to a ball on her own. She goes under the wing of some married woman, or else an older gentleman belonging to the family, and there's no arguing with it and no exception made for a girl of 22 who's been to a dozen of these already. Mrs. Augusta Amberley will sit somewhere at the edge of the room in dark silk, and she will not dance, and she will drink one glass of something, and she will see everything. I've thought about what that job actually is. It isn't chaperoning in the way we picture it, all suspicion and hawk eyes. Most of the evening it's just being there, being a fixed point in a moving room, somewhere to go back to when a dance ends, and the next partner hasn't come, and you'd rather not be a woman standing alone. That's what the aunt is, mostly. A chair you're allowed to return to, and I suspect the young ones resented it and needed it in almost equal measure, and would only have admitted to the first. The cloak now over everything, and it's a heavy one, not the light thing she'll be seen in, but a real winter cloak, because it's January, and the carriage is not warm, and there's absolutely no sense in freezing on the way to a ball out of vanity. She'll shed the heavy one downstairs at Carrick Court in a room set aside for exactly that purpose. Out here in the country, a woman who dresses for the ballroom and not for the road is a woman who catches a cold that lasts until March. And then she's standing in front of the glass, and Nellie has stepped back, and the candles are all lit. She looks at herself. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy for me to tell you what she sees, and I don't actually know. That's the honest truth of it. I know what she's wearing, down to the pins. I know the fabric and the hour and the temperature of the room, but whether she looked at that face and thought yes or thought oh, whether she felt beautiful or merely correct, nobody wrote that down, and nobody ever does. What I'd guess, and it's only a guess, is that she felt both. That there was a small flare of something like pleasure, quickly put away, and underneath it a running list. Hair fastened, gloves on, flowers holding, boots white, nothing loud, nothing loose, nothing anyone could remember afterwards. A checklist running quietly, the way it runs in anybody who's about to walk into a room and be assessed. Girls have stood in front of mirrors doing this for as long as there have been mirrors. And the list changes, and the fabric changes, and the century changes, and the thing itself, the last look, the small breath, the will I do, has not changed at all, and I don't think it's going to. Downstairs a door opens and closes, and someone says something about the horses. Her aunt calls up the stairs, not urgently, just her name, once, the way you'd call it if you were going to call it again in 5 minutes anyway. Beatrice takes her fan off the table. She looks around the room once, the way you do, the fire banked, the candles that will be put out the moment she's gone, the bed already turned down for a body that won't be in it for another 6 hours. The card is still propped against the china dish by the window. It's done its work now. It brought her here to this, and she won't look at it again. She goes out and Nellie follows with the cloak over her arm, and the light in the room goes down to almost nothing. And the dress that hung by the fire for 4 days is walking down a staircase in the dark. The carriage smells of cold leather and horse and the faint mineral smell of a frost that's been settling since 4 in the afternoon. Beatrice sits with her hands in her lap, gloved, and her aunt sits opposite her, and neither of them says very much, because there isn't very much to say, and because talking in a moving carriage on a bad road is more effort than it's worth. The lamps swing, there's a hot brick under the rug wrapped in flannel, and it's been hot for about 1.5 miles and is now simply warm and will be cold by the time they arrive. The road out to Carrick Court is not a good road. It never has been. Every rut in it goes straight up through the wheels and into the small of her back, and she braces without thinking about it, the way you brace on a boat. She's holding her skirt slightly off the floor of the carriage with 2 fingers. Not much, just enough, because the floor of a carriage in January is not a place you want white tarlatan sitting in, and because in about 4 minutes she's going to have to get out of this thing in front of a lighted door, and there is nothing in the entire evening ahead of her that matters more than the next 90 seconds. I'm not exaggerating. I want to tell you a story about this. There was an empress 100 years before Beatrice was born who wanted a wife for one of her sons. She sent word to a princess, come to court and bring the 3 girls so that a choice can be made. And the coach pulled up at the palace gate and the 3 young women came out of it, and the empress watched them from a window. And before any of them had said a single word to her, before she'd heard a voice, seen a curtsy, or been told one thing about their characters, she'd chosen. She went straight to the middle one and took her hand and said, "This is the one." The mother was astonished and asked why, and the Empress told her. The eldest had trodden on her own dress gettings down and saved herself from a fall only by a graceless scramble. The youngest had jumped, simply jumped, clear of the steps, straight onto the ground like a boy off a wall, and the second had lifted the front of her skirt just enough to let the toe of her shoe show, and come down neither in a rush nor stiffly, and arrived on the gravel as though the whole thing had cost her nothing at all. "That," said the Empress, "is a woman who can be an empress. The eldest is clumsy, the youngest is wild. 3 seconds. That's what it took. 3 seconds and a set of coach steps and a life decided." I don't fully know what to do with that story, honestly, and I've been turning it over for days. Part of me wants to say it's monstrous, that no one should be able to read a whole human being off the way she gets out of a carriage, and that anyone who claims to be doing so is mostly just flattering their own eye. And I think that's true. But then there's the other half of it, the half I can't quite argue away. Because the Empress wasn't wrong about what she saw. She saw a young woman under mild pressure, unprepared, unobserved as far as she knew. And she saw how that young woman handled a small physical problem in public. Not gracefully in the sense of prettily, gracefully in the sense of without panic, without fuss, without either freezing or flinging herself at it. And I suppose you could argue that's not nothing. I suppose you could argue that's most of what any of us are ever really judging in a stranger, and the rest is conversation on top. Anyway, Beatrice knows that story. Every girl of her sort has been told that story, and the telling of it has one purpose only, which is to make sure that when the carriage door opens, you do not step on your own hem. The wheels change sound, gravel now, instead of packed dirt, and the lamps of the house come round the trees all at once, and there it is. Carrick Court, lit from the ground floor to the second, every window burning and light lying out across the frost in long yellow shapes. There are 3 carriages ahead of them in the drive, unloading, moving off, and someone's horse doesn't like the noise, and is being spoken to sharply by a man in a heavy coat. Somebody laughs somewhere, close in the dark, then their turn, and the door and the cold coming in, and the folded steps swinging down with a clank. Beatrice gathers the front of her skirt with her left hand, just the front, just enough to clear it, and puts her right hand into the hand that's offered, and she comes down the steps 1, 2, and onto the gravel, and it's over. Nobody watched. Or rather, everybody watched and nobody watched, in the way that a crowd of people arriving somewhere all watch each other, without any of them noticing that they're doing it. She's on the ground, her hem's clean. The cold hits her face and her arms above the gloves, and it feels wonderful for about 4 seconds, and then it stops feeling wonderful. The front door is open before they reach it. It doesn't get knocked on. There's a man standing just inside it whose entire job for the whole of this evening is to be the thing that opens when a guest comes up the steps, and he'll do that job over and over for the next hour and a half, and then again in reverse from 1 in the morning until the last carriage goes. And then the hall. Here's what happens to the body when you come into a house like this on a January night. First the sound goes away. Outside there was wind and gravel and horses and men's voices. Inside there's a low mass of noise from somewhere above and to the left, muffled by doors, and under it the hall itself is almost silent. Then the temperature hits, and it's a physical thing, a wall of it, enormous speakers burning somewhere out of sight and having been burning since morning. Then the smell, beeswax and coal smoke and hothouse flowers, and underneath everything, faintly from a long way off, food. Beatrice stands in that for a moment with her cloak still on, and her cheeks going hot and her eyes watering slightly from the change. And she wants, genuinely wants, to just stand there. She can't. There are people behind her. And there's a rule, and the rule is quite firm about it. You do not stop, not in the hall, not on the stairs. You do not pause to greet a friend you've spotted. You do not stand about admiring the flowers. You do not get into a conversation on a staircase with your cloak still on and your hair still full of the wind. You go up, you go straight to the room they've set aside for you, and you deal with yourself, and then you come down, and only then do you exist socially. There's a second man waiting where the first stairs turn, and he does nothing all night but point. Ladies that way, gentlemen the other. He'll say it perhaps 200 times before midnight. He points, and Beatrice goes where he points, and her aunt follows. Now, the room. I want to spend some time in here, because I think this is one of the loveliest and least celebrated rooms in the whole 19th century, and almost nobody ever tells you about it. It's a bedroom, ordinarily. Tonight it isn't. Tonight it's been stripped of most of what it usually is and turned into something more like a workshop, and every single thing in it has been put there on purpose days ago by a woman thinking hard about what 100 people arriving out of the cold are actually going to need. There's a fire, and it's been lit for hours, and the room is properly warm. That's first, and it isn't decorative. It's the whole point. A guest who comes in half frozen from a winter road, or worse, damp from a wet one, and is then sent to fix her hair in a cold, badly lit room, is a guest who will be uncomfortable and cross for the rest of the night, and she will never say so, and it will be entirely the hostess's fault. There's a washstand, and on it, water, soap, towels, not a token amount, actual water. There's a bureau, on it a few brushes, a comb or two, and hairpins loose in a dish, in quantity. There are 2 mirrors, 2, a large one and a small one, and that detail alone tells you somebody has been through this evening in her head from beginning to end. Because a large mirror is for the whole of you, and a small one is for the thing on your left temple that has come loose, and you cannot do the second job at the first mirror without standing in front of it far too long while 6 other women wait. There's a pin cushion filled with large pins and small ones, and there's a workbox, a proper one, with needle and thread and everything else in it, sitting there in a bedroom at a party waiting for the moment, which will absolutely come, when a woman puts her heel through the flounce of another woman's dress in a doorway, and both of them go white. And there are salts, smelling salts, and hartshorn and eau de cologne, all set out together, because it's going to be very warm in these rooms tonight, and somebody is going to feel faint. And it is much better to have the bottle already in the room than to send a maid running for it down 2 flights of stairs while the woman sits down on the floor. Now think about what that little collection of objects means. Somebody sat down days before this party and worked out, in advance, in cold blood, every small disaster that could happen to a female body between the front door and the ballroom. Hair coming down, a torn hem, wet feet, a dirty hand, a faint. And she put the answer to each one in a bowl or a box on a bureau upstairs, and then she went away and said nothing about it to anybody. That's not decoration, that's care. That's somebody imagining her way into 100 other people's evenings and quietly arranging for them not to go wrong. And it strikes me that this is one of the oldest and most invisible kinds of work there is, and that it's almost never the thing anybody thanks you for, because when it's done well, nothing happens. The hem doesn't tear, the salts aren't needed, the evening is simply fine. I think a great deal of the world runs on that kind of work, and always has, and nobody writes it down. There are 2 maids in here, and they aren't standing about. As each woman comes through the door, one of them steps in and takes the cloak from her shoulders, and the hood and the overshoes, those thick, unromantic things that have kept a pair of white satin boots out of the mud between the carriage and the step, and which will now be hidden away for 6 hours as though they never existed. And then the maid does something clever, and it's my favourite piece of housekeeping in the entire building. She rolls everything the woman has taken off into a single bundle, cloak, hood, overshoes, all of it in one, and then she pins to that bundle a small card prepared beforehand with the name written on it clearly. That's it. That's the whole system. But think about what it prevents. At 3 o'clock in the morning, in a corridor, in the dark, 100 exhausted people are going to want 100 specific cloaks, and every one of those cloaks is going to be a dark, heavy woolen thing that looks exactly like 99 other dark, heavy woolen things. Without the cards, that hour is chaos. It's people holding up garments and squinting. It's a woman going home in someone else's coat. With the cards, it's a maid reading a name and putting a bundle into a pair of arms. In the ballroom, they do it slightly differently. A numbered ticket pinned to the bundle, and the matching number handed to the guest, who then has to keep hold of a small piece of card all night in a dress with no pockets to speak of, which is its own small comedy, and I imagine a fair number of those numbers went into gloves and stayed there. Beatrice hands over her cloak and lets it go, but she feels lighter and colder at once. The white of the dress comes out from underneath all that dark wool like something surfacing, and the room gets to work on her. A maid takes the overshoes away. Another turns her by the shoulders, gently, and looks at the back of her, and says nothing, which means it's all right. This is the last inspection she'll get from anyone who's on her side. Everything after this is strangers. It's very warm in here. Warmer than it needs to be, almost. But that's deliberate, too. There are 5 or 6 women in here already, and one of them is standing squarely in front of the large mirror doing something intricate to her hair, and taking her time. Beatrice waits. That's the rule. And it's a small one, and she keeps it without thinking. You don't push forward, You don't slide in beside someone at a mirror and start working in the corner of it. You wait your turn, and then you do what you need to do, quickly, and you get out of the way. Because there's a whole line of women behind you who are all standing in a hot room in ball dresses wanting exactly the same 3 feet of glass. And you don't talk. Not really. Not the way you would if this were a room of friends and no one else was in it. Because here's the thing about this room, it's the most dangerous room in the house. It's warm, it's crowded, it's semi-private, everyone in it is a little keyed up, and critically, nobody has started being on their best behaviour yet. The company hasn't been entered. It feels like backstage. And so it is enormously tempting to lean over to the friend beside you and say the small, true, unkind thing about somebody, the thing you'd never say downstairs. Don't. That's the instruction. And the reasoning behind it is not moral so much as it is architectural. You will be overheard. In a room this size, with this many women in it, you cannot control who is standing behind you. And the woman you're speaking about may very well be 4 feet away with her back turned, pinning a flower into her hair, and you will not know, and you will find out later, and there will be nothing on this earth you can do about it. So she doesn't. She smooths the front of her skirt where it's creased from the carriage, and lets a maid twitch a fold straight at the back and touches the flowers at her temple with "Ooh, 2 fingers to see if they've moved, and they haven't. Her turn at the mirror comes. She takes about 40 seconds, then she gives it up. That's the discipline of it. Do the necessary thing, don't linger. And she has a gentleman waiting downstairs somewhere near a doorway who has already given up his hat and coat and is standing about with nothing to do, and every minute she spends in front of that glass is a minute he spends being a man on his own in a hallway. It isn't much of a hardship, but it's discourteous, and she knows it, and so she goes. Her aunt has already gone down. Somewhere below there's a room she has to walk into, and a woman standing near the door of it whom she has to speak to first, before she speaks to anybody else at all, and she knows exactly which woman, and exactly how long, and exactly what she'll say. She checks her fan is in her hand. She checks the pincushion is in her pocket. And she goes out onto the landing where the noise is suddenly much louder, and the light is much stronger, and the whole warm roar of the house comes up the stairwell at her like something breathing. The parlour door is open, and the sound that's been building since she came up the stairs is now a single warm, unbroken thing, like a river heard from a bridge. Beatrice goes in. Mrs. Carrick is standing near the doorway. Not quite at the door, but close enough that every person walking in can find her without looking. She's been there since 7:30. She hasn't sat down, she hasn't left the room, and she won't, not once, not for the whole of the evening, because a hostess who disappears, even for 5 minutes, even to check on the supper or speak to a cook, is a hostess who has told the room she's worried. And a worried hostess is a failed one, in the small cruel logic of all this, regardless of whether the worry was justified. So she stands, and as Beatrice comes through, Mrs. Carrick turns and steps forward. Not far, a few paces, the kind of small movement that says "I see you" without shouting it across the room. And she speaks to Beatrice first because that's the order. The lady guest before the gentleman who brought her. The eldest lady before the youngest. And if there are several ladies arriving together, you greet the oldest, then the next, then the youngest, then finally the gentleman. It's all queuing, invisible queuing, a kind of mental sorting that happens so quickly it looks like instinct, but isn't. Beatrice's escort, a cousin, somebody's brother, a young man named Mr. Halford, who was asked to bring her and is doing it with the mild cheerfulness of a person performing a duty he doesn't mind, is standing a half step behind her. Mrs. Carrick has never met him. Beatrice introduces him, and Mrs. Carrick speaks to him for perhaps 10 seconds, and then they move on, because there are people behind them, and the last thing a new arrival should do is stand at the door making long and fascinating conversation with the hostess, while 8 other guests wait in the hall, and then they're in. The room is warmer than the hallway, which was already warm, and it's going to get warmer, and by 10 o'clock it's going to be a thing you notice every time you stop moving. The fires have been banked low on purpose. Somebody thought about this in the morning, reducing the heat in the grates because later, with 40 bodies and dancing, the room will produce its own. That kind of foresight is invisible by design. Nobody walks into a drawing room and says, "You've set the fires perfectly." They just don't think about the fires at all, which is the point. Candles everywhere, in the sconces on the walls, in a chandelier if there is one, on every surface that can hold them. The light is thick, it's golden, it moves, and it does something remarkable to the room. It makes everything slightly uncertain. Faces are softer in it. Fabric looks richer. Colours deepen. A woman who looked merely pleasant in daylight looks, in this, lovely. And a room that in the morning is just somebody's front parlour is, tonight, something close to enchanted. It smells like flowers. Not garden flowers, hothouse flowers, forced in glass and warmth through the dead of winter, and costing more than most people in this house will ever know. They're everywhere, in vases on tables, in little bowls on the mantel, in arrangements on sideboards. A woman who gives a party in January and fills the room with flowers that shouldn't exist until May is a woman who is saying something about herself, quietly with petals. And there are tables here and there, with things laid out on them. Not food, objects, curiosities, books with good binding, engravings in folios, left open to interesting pages, and stereoscopes, those funny heavy binoculars that you hold up to your face and look through at two photographs side by side, and something happens in your eyes, and the flat picture becomes a room you could walk into. I keep thinking about those stereoscopes, because they're not there to be admired, they're not decoration. They're there because Mrs. Carrick has been through enough of these evenings to know that the worst part of a dinner party is not the dinner. It's the 45 minutes before the dinner. Guests arrive in clumps at different times, and they're hungry, and they don't all know each other, and the host is doing his best, but he can only be in one conversation at once. And so a clever hostess scatters things around the room, things that can be picked up, looked at, exclaimed over, so that a woman who doesn't know anybody can cross to a table, open a folio, and look like she's busy. She gives her guests something to hold. And that small act of giving something to hold turns out to be the difference between a room that breathes and one that suffocates. There are about 20 people here already, and more coming in behind Beatrice. The sound is mostly conversation, though underneath it there's a fire crackling and from somewhere far off in the house the faint sound of plates. Now. The talking. This is where it gets complicated, and I want to slow down for a minute and sit with what's actually being asked of her. She has to talk. She can't not talk. A woman who comes to an evening party and stands at the edge of it saying nothing is a woman who might as well not have come. Worse, she's a weight on the evening, a gap in the room that other people have to work around. The book is very frank about this. It says that a woman who sits in company as though her mere presence were contribution enough, who brings nothing to the common stock of talk, becomes something like an empty chair with addrests on it. That's a ruthless thing to say about someone who's probably just shy. But she also can't talk too much. A woman who fills every silence, who hurries her remarks in the moment another person opens their mouth, who cannot bear to let a sentence go past without adding to it, that woman is just as bad. The room backs away from her. People begin to resent the monopoly. The voice that might have been charming for 5 minutes becomes, after 20, a sound you'd pay to be rid of. So the space she's operating in is this. Talk enough, but not too much. Listen carefully, but don't just sit there nodding. Pick up on what the other person is saying, add to it, move it forward and then nid. This is the hard part. Let it go. Let someone else carry it. The whole thing is a kind of passing game, and the person who wins is the one nobody remembers winning, because she made everyone else feel like they were the interesting one. You know what stays with me about this? It's the listening. Because the book spends pages on how to talk, how to choose a subject, how to keep a conversation alive, how not to bore people, but it also says, very quietly, that listening well is itself a part of conversation. And it doesn't mean sitting still with your eyes wide, it means giving your full attention. It means not fidgeting, not glancing at the door, not forming your answer while the other person is still in the middle of theirs. And it means, this is the part I can't stop thinking about, sympathising gently with the speaker, agreeing where you can, and where you can't agree, differing gently. That word, gently, it comes up again and again in the instructions, and after a while it stops sounding like a suggestion and starts sounding like a survival manual. Because the drawing room before dinner is not a safe place to be clever. It's not a place where a sharp wit is going to serve you. It's a room full of people who are all slightly anxious and slightly hungry and not yet settled into the evening. And what they want from you is not brilliance. What they want is ease. They want to feel that they've talked to someone pleasant. They want to leave the conversation feeling warmer than when they entered it. And the woman who gives them that, who asks a question and actually listens to the answer, who says something kind about a thing they've said, who makes them feel that their own small observation was worth making, that woman has done something far more difficult than being witty, and she'll never be praised for it, because she wasn't trying to be praised. Beatrice is doing this now, and doing it well enough, though if you watched her from across the room you wouldn't notice anything at all. She's standing with two women she knows and one she doesn't, and they're looking at a book of engravings that someone has opened on a side table, and one of the women is saying something about a cathedral she once visited. And Beatrice is listening and making a sound now and then that means go on, and turning a page when the conversation is ready for one. That's it. That's all it looks like from the outside. But from the inside it's constant work, and you have to be careful. There are traps. The first one is the confidential conversation. Two people standing together, voices dropped, heads close, and it doesn't matter whether they're talking about embroidery or the state of the roads, because to everyone else in the room it looks like a secret. And secrets make other people uncomfortable. They create pockets of exclusion. They suggest that the two people talking are too good for the general company. So you don't do it. You keep your voice at a level that says I have nothing to hide, and you keep your face open, and you don't turn your shoulder against the room. The second trap is the display of affection. Two friends who haven't seen each other for weeks meet in a drawing room, and the natural thing and the human thing is to rush together, embrace, kiss, make a spectacle of how much they've missed each other. Don't, not here, not in company. A display like that draws every eye, and it makes everyone who is not being embraced feel that they are witnessing something they should not be witnessing, and it lowers the general comfort of the room. You may love her dearly. You may save your kisses for the carriage home. The third trap, and the worst of them, is the long private conversation with a gentleman. Not because anything improper is happening, almost certainly nothing is, but a young woman who is seen talking at length, in a low voice, with one man, in a corner at a party. She has given the room a sentence to write about her, and it will be written, not tonight, maybe, but tomorrow, at breakfast, in somebody's front parlour, over tea. The sentence will be constructed and spoken aloud, and she will never hear it, and it will be perfectly unfair, and it will be her fault. I want to be honest about how this makes me feel, because part of me thinks, this is suffocating. This is a room where a woman cannot talk to a man, cannot whisper to a friend, cannot sit quietly and think her own thoughts without being accused of failing the evening, and that's a terrible thing. It's a cage made of smiles. But then, I think about what the room actually looks like when everyone keeps the rules. And it doesn't look like a cage, it looks like, I don't know how to say this without sounding as though I approve of things I'm not sure I approve of. It looks like something generous. It looks like 40 people who have each made a small sacrifice of their own comfort so that everyone else can be comfortable. Nobody is whispering because nobody is being excluded. Nobody is monopolizing because nobody is being ignored. Nobody is being brilliantly, showily clever because nobody is being made to feel stupid. It's not freedom, but it's warm. It's an evening that works, and I suppose that's the argument. That it was always an argument even in 1860. That the rules weren't just about control. They were about trying to build a room where shy people could breathe. Time passes, and more people arrive, and Mrs. Carrick meets each of them at the door and speaks to each of them, and introduces strangers to the friends who will look after them until she can come back around. Because a stranger left alone in a drawing room is a hostess's worst failure, and she knows it. And there's one more job the hostess does, and it's so quiet you'd miss it if you weren't looking. When a stranger comes in, a guest from out of town, somebody's visiting relation, a woman who knows no one in the room, Mrs. Carrick doesn't just greet her and set her loose. She walks her to a friend. She introduces them. She stays for a sentence or two, long enough that the conversation takes hold, and then she slips away. The stranger never stands alone. She's passed from one warm hand to the next, and by the time Mrs. Carrick has moved on, the woman has someone to talk to and somewhere to look. And the awful emptiness of being a person nobody knows in a room full of people who know each other has been quietly, gently closed. And slowly the room fills, and the noise rises, and the smell of flowers gets lost inside the smell of warmth, and bodies and coal, and Beatrice moves from one conversation to another the way you're supposed to, not hurrying, not lingering, not letting any one person feel abandoned when she turns away. Her aunt is sitting in a chair by the window in her dark silk, watching. Mr. Halford is across the room, talking to somebody's father about something that makes them both nod slowly. He's not a remarkable man, and this is not a remarkable conversation, and neither of them is trying to be anything more than pleasant, and the room is better for it. There's a thing the book says about subjects to avoid, and it's worth a moment here, because the list is longer than you'd think, and some of it is surprising. Don't talk about religion unless you're absolutely certain nobody present will be pained by it. Don't ask a professional man about his work. The doctor doesn't want to discuss a patient's symptoms at a party, the lawyer doesn't want to talk about his cases, and the author very much does not want to be asked about his latest book, no matter how famous he is. He came here to rest. Don't correct somebody's grammar in front of the room, even if she says something that makes you wince. If she's a close friend, mention it later. Privately, kindly. If she's not close, let it go. Let it go completely. Swallow the correction and move on. Because the pain of being publicly corrected is worse than the crime of a mispronounced word, and every person in the room knows which one of you they'd rather stand beside. And never, this one is underlined almost in the calm voice of the book, never repeat an unkind remark you've heard about the person you're talking to. If you've heard something flattering, share it freely. If it was cruel, bury it, take it home with you and let it die. Because repeating it will not help her, will not protect her, or will not prepare her for anything except the knowledge that she's being spoken of, which is a knowledge that does nobody any good at all. I wonder how many drawing rooms in 1860 were full of women carrying buried sentences around in their heads, things they'd heard and not repeated, things they'd swallowed for the sake of somebody's evening. I wonder if any of them ever thanked each other for it. Probably not. You can't thank someone for a thing they didn't say. There's a clock somewhere in the house. Beatrice can't see it, but she can feel the time in the room, the way you can feel a tide. The conversation is getting louder slightly. The pauses between remarks are getting shorter. People are beginning to look, without looking, toward the dining room door. They're hungry, and it's the strangest thing, nobody will say so. Not a single person in this room will mention that they've been here for 40 minutes and they're cold inside and they'd like very much to sit down and eat something. Because to say so would be to imply that the hostess has not planned the evening well enough, or that the dinner is delayed, or that the company is insufficient to fill the time. So they carry on. They pick up another stereoscope. They admire another engraving. They talk about the cold and the roads and the wonderful flowers, and the hostess stands at the door and smiles and does not look at the clock either. Somewhere in the back of the house, behind two closed doors, a man is carving meat as fast as his hands will go. A door opens somewhere at the back of the house and a man comes through it and speaks to Mr. Carrick, who is standing near the fireplace, and Mr. Carrick nods, and the man goes out again, and nobody in the room has noticed any of this except Mrs. Carrick, who noticed all of it, and whose face hasn't changed. Then Mr. Carrick catches his wife's eye across the room. That's all. He doesn't announce anything. He doesn't call out. He catches her eye, and she understands, and she turns to the room and says very calmly that dinner is ready. What happens next is the most carefully choreographed thing you'll see all evening, and it happens so smoothly that it looks accidental. Mrs. Carrick has already decided who goes with whom. She's worked this out days ago on paper, sitting at her own desk, pairing off the whole company like a general arranging troops. Except that the aim is not battle, but the opposite of battle. The aim is that every person walking through that dining room door has someone on their arm who will keep them happy for the next 2 hours. The quiet man goes with the lively woman. The shy girl goes with the older, steady gentleman who can be trusted to draw her out. The bore, and every party has one, make no mistake, and a good hostess knows exactly who hers is, goes with the woman whose patience is widest and whose eyes are kindest and whose temper will hold through the pudding. She's been running this equation in her head all evening. 2 guests cancelled yesterday, and she rearranged the whole table. 1 replacement came this morning and she rearranged it again. Nobody will ever know. Now she speaks. She says a name, and then another name, and a gentleman steps forward and offers his arm to a lady, and they fall in behind the hostess, and then another pair, and another, and it becomes a kind of slow procession, 2 by 2, like something out of a church, except that the pace is easy and nobody is solemn. Mrs. Carrick leads. She goes first, on the arm of the gentleman she considers the most distinguished of her male guests, and the host, Mr. Carrick, comes last, with the most honoured lady on his arm. Between them, the rest of the company sort themselves into their pairs and walk through in order. Nobody pushes ahead, nobody hangs back. It's a kind of river, and it moves because the banks have already been cut for it. And here's a small thing. If Beatrice is walking in with Mr. Halford, and she sees a friend across the room whom she'd much rather walk with, she does nothing. She takes the arm that's been given to her. She smiles at the man she's been paired with because he's her charge now, and she's his. And to trade would be to tell the hostess she's got it wrong, which is the worst thing you can do to a woman who's been getting it right all week on paper. Trissy takes Mr. Halford's arm. His coat sleeve is warm and slightly rough under her gloved fingers, and he walks at a pace that lets her skirt settle with each step, which is either kindness or accident, and she doesn't much care which. They're somewhere in the middle of the line, which is the correct place for a young woman of no particular importance. Important enough to be here, but not important enough to be near the front. The corridor between the drawing room and the dining room is the quietest part of the evening. Briefly, for perhaps 10 seconds, the noise of the parlour falls behind and the noise of the dining room hasn't started, and it's just footsteps and the rustle of fabric and somebody's breath, and the faint, extraordinary smell of a meal that's been cooking since noon. I want you to notice what's happening to the light. They're walking from one set of candles to another, and there's a gap in the middle, a stretch of hallway that's dimmer, cooler, where the only light is what leaks out from the rooms on either side. For a moment, Beatrice is almost in shadow. The white dress goes grey, the ribbon in her hair loses its colour, and then the dining room doorway opens up ahead of her, blazing, and the dress comes back. The dining room door is open, and the first thing you notice, the thing that stops you, or would stop you if you were allowed to stop, which you're not, is the table. It's oval, not long, not round, oval. And if you asked most people why an oval table, they'd say it looks nice, and they'd be right. But that's not the reason. The reason is sound. A long table that plants the host at the far end and his wife at the near one puts 20 feet of damask between them, and no voice carries that far without shouting. A round table wide enough for 20 guests puts such a distance across the middle that the man opposite you might as well be in another county. But an oval table, narrower, curved, with the host and hostess sitting across from each other at the middle of the long sides, lets everybody hear everybody, or nearly. A conversation started at one end can ripple down and reach the other. The shape of the table is an argument about what a dinner party is for, and the oval says it's for talking. The cloth is white, so white it hurts a little in the candlelight. Damask, that thick, heavy linen with the pattern woven into the weave itself, so you can see it only when the light catches it from one angle and then it disappears again. It's been ironed until it shines. Nobody in this room is going to comment on the tablecloth, and if they did it would be strange, but if it was stained or creased or slightly grey from too many washes, every person at this table would notice, and not one of them would say a word, and it would follow Mrs. Carrick around for a season. That's the invisible standard. It's not that people demand perfection, it's that they remember imperfection and forget everything else. Now the settings. In front of each chair, a plate, a knife, a fork, a spoon, a small roll of bread sitting on the plate like a sleeping animal. A salt cellar, one per person not shared with its own tiny silver spoon. A water goblet, tall, clear, and then the wine glasses, 4 of them, 4. Lined up in descending order, each a different size, each waiting for a different wine, each one cleaned until the glass itself is nearly invisible. I don't think most people today have 4 different glasses for one meal, but in 1860 the glasses aren't excess, they're grammar. Each one means something. This one is for the sherry after the soup, this one for the claret with the meat, this one for the champagne, which may come with the pastry or may not come at all, depending on the hostess's ambition and the wine merchant's bill. Beatrice won't drink any of them, not because she's been told not to exactly, though the book does say that no lady should take wine at dinner, and it says it with the calm authority of a person who has watched too many women with flushed cheeks trying to pretend they're not uncomfortable. It says that even if you can hold your wine perfectly well, the heat will come and the headache will come, and you will spend the rest of the evening paying for a pleasure that lasted 30 seconds. But that's the book's reason. Beatrice's reason is simpler. She doesn't like it much. And she knows the trick, which every woman at this table knows, which is to raise the glass when the toast is made, touch it to her lips, set it down again, and nobody will notice whether she drank or not. The gesture is enough. The glass goes up, the glass comes down, honour is satisfied, and in the middle of the table, the centrepiece. A basket of flowers, or a stand of fruit on fresh green leaves, or a glass pyramid with something shining inside it. Something tall enough to be seen from every seat, but not so tall that it blocks the face of the person across from you. That's another invisible calculation. If the centrepiece is too high, the two halves of the table can't see each other, and the dinner splits into two separate parties, and the hostess has failed at something she can never fix once the first course is served. There are small bouquets too, one in front of each plate. A few flowers, tight, fragrant, placed there hours ago by somebody's hand. It's the sort of detail that doesn't seem like much until you think about what it means, which is that somebody counted the guests and made that many tiny bundles of flowers, one for each, identical, so that nobody would feel less considered than anybody else. Even the bouquets are an argument about fairness. The candles on the table are low, not tall tapers. Those would block a face just as surely as too high a centrepiece. Short candles, or candles in low holders, throwing their light upward onto chins and cheekbones and the undersides of hands. Somebody thought about this too. Somebody sat in this room yesterday afternoon probably, and held a candlestick at different heights, and looked at where the shadows fell. Mr. Carrick sits across from his wife, at the centre of the opposite long side, which is the host's seat. Not the head, because an oval table has no head. That's the point. The host and hostess face each other across the middle, and the guests spread outward in both directions. And nobody is at the end of anything. Nobody is far away. Even the person furthest from the centre is only 2 or 3 seats from someone who can draw them in. No meat on the table. That's important, and it surprises people. The table you're looking at, all that crystal, all that damask, all those flowers, has no food on it at all, apart from the bread rolls and the celery, and a few clear dishes of jelly or pickles catching the light like little windows. Everything else, all of it, is on a side table, behind the guests, being carved and portioned and plated by a man whose hands have not stopped moving since 6 o'clock. This is how it works. The food comes to you. You don't go to it. A servant leans in, quietly, on soft shoes, gloved in white, a folded napkin over one arm, and he asks you what you'd like and he brings it. You never reach, you never stand, you never pass a dish. The whole meal moves around you like weather. I keep thinking about those shoes. Soft shoes, light shoes, the kind of shoes that make no sound on a carpeted floor. Because the floor is carpeted, even if everywhere else in the house it's bare boards. The dining room gets a carpet specifically so that the servants' footsteps disappear. You're not supposed to hear them. You're supposed to feel as though the food arrives by itself. As though the empty plate lifts itself away, as though the wine pours from nothing into a glass that was empty a moment ago and is now full. The whole machinery of service is designed to be invisible, and the people doing the work are designed to be invisible too, and I have never been able to decide whether that's beautiful or cruel. Probably both. Most things like this are both. Now Beatrice sits down. The chair is easy, armless, with a tall slanting back, designed for a woman in a wide skirt, which is a sentence that tells you a great deal about who builds furniture and who wears it. She gathers the sides of her dress as she lowers herself, pulling the fabric in so it doesn't spread onto the chair of the person next to her. Because silk takes up room. A woman in a full skirt at a dinner ball is a woman who is, at all times, conscious of the exact radius of her own body, and she has been since she was 14. If her skirt rides up onto the chair beside her, and the person sitting there pulls their chair out suddenly, there'll be a sound, that thin, awful sound of silk tearing, and nothing in the evening will fix it. She sits neither too close nor too far from the edge, close enough to eat without leaning, far enough to keep her lap out of danger. And now the napkin. She unfolds it and quietly, without anybody seeing, takes the pincushion out of her pocket and pins the napkin to her belt. 1 pin, 2, done. It will not move now. It will not slide off that silk and onto the floor, which is what napkins do on silk, always, without exception, at exactly the worst possible moment. She puts the pincushion back in her pocket and places her hands in her lap and looks up. The gentleman to her right is already looking at her. He's been placed there on purpose by a woman who thought about it on Tuesday, and he's the sort of person who smiles before he speaks, which is the best sort of person to be seated beside at a dinner you're slightly nervous about. To her left is a woman she's met once before, an older woman in dark green who already has her napkin unfolded, and who looks as though she's sat down to 1,000 dinners and intends to sit down to 1,000 more. There's something restful about being next to a person like that. Like sitting beside a wall. You don't have to hold anything up. There's a pause, the room settles, chairs scrape, skirts are adjusted. Somebody laughs softly at the far end of the table. The candles pull sideways in a draught and then straighten. And here's the thing I can't quite shake about this moment. Everybody is performing and nobody is performing. Every person at this table has spent the last hour being watched and watching, arranging themselves and being arranged, and now they're sitting in a room that has been constructed, physically constructed, from the shape of the table to the height of the flowers to the softness of the shoes on the carpet, to make them feel comfortable. And the extraordinary thing is that it works. The room does feel comfortable. The light is right. The warmth is right. The flowers smell the way flowers should smell, and the bread is warm and the linen is white, and the person beside you has just smiled. All of that comfort, every bit of it, was built by somebody. Planned, arranged, fretted over, adjusted. The hostess worrying about the centerpiece height, the cook worrying about the soup, the servant worrying about his shoes. 100 small anxieties, layered one on top of another, and the result, when it works, when all of it comes together, is a room that feels as though no one worried at all, as though it simply happened. That's the trick, isn't it? The whole gorgeous trick of hospitality, making the effort invisible, making the worry look like ease. Mrs. Carrick sits down last. She unfolds her napkin. She looks at her husband across the oval of damask and crystal and small bright flowers, and something passes between them. Not a word, not even a nod, just a look that says it started, and it's working, and everything is where it should be. And then somebody coughs, gently, from a corner, and the room turns, very slightly to attention. There's one more rule, and Beatrice keeps it without thinking. You don't begin to eat before the others are ready. You don't touch your bread. You don't unfold the roll and start tearing pieces off it while the person beside you is still arranging her skirt. You wait, and you don't look as though you're waiting. You sit with your hands in your lap and your face turned pleasantly toward the person beside you, and you let the room finish becoming itself. And then, only then, when everybody is settled and the hostess gives whatever small signal she gives, does the meal begin. Starting now, the servants are moving, and the first one steps forward with the soup. The soup is clear, that's deliberate. A thick soup, a heavy soup, a soup that sits in the stomach like a stone. That's the kind of soup that ruins a dinner before it started, because it fills you before the fish, and then the meat arrives and you can't face it, and then the pudding arrives and you're staring at it with dread. The soup at a dinner like this is light, almost fragile, the kind of thing that barely weighs anything in the spoon. 1 ladleful per person. That's all. The servant comes to Beatrice's left side, always the left, always, and the bowl is placed in front of her, and the steam comes up and it smells like something made from the bones of a very old and very patient chicken, reduced for hours until there's nothing left of it but warmth and flavour. She picks up the soup spoon. It's the large one, on the outside, and here is where the invisible rules start closing in. You eat soup silently. That's the first commandment, and it's absolute. No slurping, no blowing, no bringing the spoon to your mouth with a sound that tells the table you're enjoying yourself. If the soup is too hot, and it will be because it came from a kitchen 40 feet away in the hands of a man who was walking quickly, you wait. You set the spoon down, you talk to the person beside you. You do not, under any circumstances, blow on it. You wait, and the soup cools, and when it's ready you eat it as though temperature were a thing that had never concerned you. Beatrice eats. Small spoonfuls lifted neatly, tipped into the mouth without a sound. It's such a simple thing, eating soup, and yet I've been reading about it for hours, and the number of ways you can do it wrong is almost comic. You can slurp, you can blow, you can break bread into it, which turns the clear surface into a kind of porridge and looks, to anyone watching, as though you've never been to dinner before. You can tip the bowl toward you instead of away from you, which is incorrect for reasons nobody has ever satisfactorily explained, but which everybody agrees on. You can eat too fast, which makes you look hungry, and looking hungry is, somehow, in some way that nobody has ever fully untangled, rude. I keep coming back to that. The idea that hunger itself is impolite, that the whole structure of a meal, the thing that exists because people are hungry, is designed to make it look as though nobody at the table actually needs the food. As though they're all here for the conversation. As though the soup is merely an excuse for the company, and the company is merely an excuse for the room, and the room is merely an excuse for the candles and the flowers. It's not true, of course. They're hungry. Every single person at this table is hungry. They've been standing in a drawing room for nearly an hour making pleasant conversation, while their stomachs made quiet, undignified sounds underneath their waistcoats and corsets. But the pretense holds, because everybody agrees to maintain it, and the meal moves forward as though appetite were a rumour. The soup goes, the bowls are lifted away, and now the wine. After the soup, a glass is poured, or rather offered, because nothing is poured without permission, and nothing is drunk without acknowledgement. A servant comes around with a bottle, and pauses at each guest, and some take it and some decline, and the ones who decline do so with a small gesture, a movement of the hand over the glass, and nobody remarks on it. To refuse wine gracefully is a skill, and Beatrice has it. She lifts a finger. The servant moves on. Then the fish. It arrives on each plate already cut, a smooth, clean slice laid flat with a piece of egg beside it and a pale sauce pulled around the edges. The carver at the side table has been at this for a while now, working the blade through the flesh in long, even strokes, and each plate that goes out is identical to the last, because the worst thing a carver can do is send out a plate that looks hacked at. A ragged slice of fish tells the table that the kitchen is behind, or the carver is tired, or the hostess has hired badly. A smooth slice tells the table nothing, which is the goal. Beatrice picks up her fork, and now the knife disappears. Not literally, it's still there on the right side of her plate, but once the fish is in front of her, she sets the knife down and doesn't pick it up again for this course. Fish is eaten with a fork and a piece of bread. The fork in the right hand, the bread in the left, and the bread is there to keep the fish from sliding off the plate while the fork does its work. That's all the bread is for. It's a tool. It's a gentle, edible backstop. And the knife does not go in the mouth. I want to say that slowly because the book says it very slowly. The knife does not go in the mouth. Not once. Not for any reason. Not to taste a sauce, not to scrape a morsel off a bone. Not because the fork is across the plate and the knife is closer. If you put the knife in your mouth at a table like this, in a room like this, in front of people like these, you have done something that will follow you. Not because it's dangerous, though it is slightly, because it marks you. It says, she doesn't know. And that sentence, once spoken inside somebody's head, is very difficult to unsay. There's a pause between the fish and the meat, and it's in this pause that the conversation does its most important work. Because the gaps between courses are the moments when the table feels longest. The food is gone, the new food hasn't come, the plates have been cleared and the cloth in front of you is empty and your hands have nothing to do, and you're sitting in a warm room with a stranger beside you and silence pressing in. So you talk. Not about the food, and commenting on the dishes is rude, even to praise them, because it draws attention to the machinery of the meal, and the whole point is that the machinery should be invisible. You talk about the weather, or the roads, or the flowers on the table. You ask a question, and listen to the answer, and ask another question, and the time between courses passes, and nobody notices. Now the meat. It comes on a plate with vegetables on a separate dish, and the servant offers both, and Beatrice takes the meat and 2 vegetables. Only 2, because taking more than 2 is greedy, and being greedy at somebody else's table is worse than being greedy at your own. She takes peas and something pale and soft, some kind of turnip or parsnip, mashed, and it sits beside the meat like a small white cloud, and the plate is arranged, and the servant moves on. You know what I notice about the way she eats? She takes small bites, not affectedly small, not the kind of tiny decorative eating that looks like a performance of not eating. Just small enough that if somebody asks her a question she can finish chewing, swallow, and answer without making them wait. That's the calculation. Every bite is sized to the speed of conversation. If you take a bite so large that you can't speak for 30 seconds, you've created a gap, and the person who asked you the question is left holding it, and both of you are uncomfortable. I find this extraordinary, that eating itself, the most basic human activity, the thing we do 3 times a day without thinking, has been subdivided into a grammar with its own rules about timing and volume and the relationship between the size of a bite and the rhythm of speech. Somebody worked this out. Somebody sat in a room and thought about it, and wrote it down and published it in a book, and a girl of 22 is sitting at a table in January executing it without a single conscious thought, because she learned it so long ago that it's become part of her body. The bread, she doesn't bite it. She breaks off a small piece with her fingers and puts it in her mouth, or she breaks off a small piece and lays it on the edge of her plate and eats it with a fork. She does not, and this is specific, and the book is very firm, dip the bread in the gravy on her plate. Not even a little. Not even if the gravy is extraordinary and the bread is warm and the temptation is considerable. Because dipping bread in gravy and then biting the end off it is one of those things that everybody does at home, alone, in their own kitchen at midnight, and absolutely nobody does at a table where they're being watched. It's the dividing line between public and private eating, and Beatrice stays on the public side without effort. There's a woman 3 seats down who has put a bone on the tablecloth. It's a small bone, a clean one, and she's placed it at the edge of her plate, but it's slipped off and it's sitting on the white damask, and nobody has said anything. And Beatrice isn't going to say anything, and Mrs. Carrick isn't going to say anything, and the bone is just going to sit there on the cloth for the rest of the meal, being quietly not mentioned by everybody. The correct place for a bone is the edge of your plate. The edge, not the tablecloth, and certainly not passed back to a servant in your fingers, because handing a servant a bone that's been in your mouth is, well, it's the kind of thing that doesn't need explaining, and if it does need explaining, the explaining won't help. But nobody corrects her. That's the rule underneath the rule. You do not, at a dinner table in front of other guests, point out that somebody has done something wrong. You ignore it. You look at the flowers. You ask the person beside you about the roads. The bone sits where it sits, and the evening carries on, and tomorrow the woman will remember and feel a small private flush of embarrassment that nobody will ever know about. And here's what I think about when I think about that bone. I think about kindness and kindness. Not grand kindness, not the kind that gets written about in books. Small structural kindness. The kindness of not noticing. The kindness of looking away at exactly the right moment, so that someone else doesn't have to feel the weight of being seen at their worst. Every person at this table is carrying a version of that kindness right now, overlooking a spill, ignoring an awkward remark, pretending not to hear a stomach growl, and they're doing it not because they're saints, but because they know that tomorrow it could be them. The bone on the cloth could be theirs, the dropped fork could be theirs, the wine glass knocked sideways could be theirs. So they look at the flowers, and the flowers are there in part to be looked at in exactly these moments. The roast comes and goes, more wine is offered, and more is declined, and the glasses that were full at the beginning of the meal are still half full and nobody is counting. And then something happens. Or rather, something almost happens, and it's in the almost that the etiquette lives. A woman near the middle of the table opens a nut from the little dish at her elbow, and inside it there is something that should not be there. A worm, or the remains of one. Small, curled, quite obviously wrong. She doesn't make a sound. She doesn't push her chair back. She doesn't exclaim or shudder, or hold the nut up for the table to inspect. She sets the nut down, catches the eye of the nearest servant and very quietly, so quietly that the man beside her doesn't notice, asks for a clean plate. The plate comes, the old one goes, the nut goes with it, and the meal carries on as though nothing happened, because nothing did happen, because she made sure of it. That's the instruction, and it's one of my favourites in the whole book, because it trusts the reader completely. It says, "You will find a worm." Not if, when. Because this is 1860, and the fruit comes from a greenhouse or a shop, and sometimes things are in it that shouldn't be, and the world has not yet invented the supply chain that prevents this. So the book doesn't pretend it won't happen. It just tells you what to do when it does, which is nothing. Nothing visible. Nothing that makes the woman beside you put down her own nut with a shudder. Nothing that tells the hostess her fruit was imperfect, because the hostess already knows, in her bones, that the fruit might be imperfect. And she has been dreading this exact moment since she placed the order. And the last thing she needs is to see it confirmed across a candlelit table. You handle it. You handle it silently. And then you eat the next thing as though the last thing never existed. Then the pastry, which is a heavy thing, a hot thing, dense with sugar and cream, and Beatrice takes a small portion because she wants more and knows better, and she eats it slowly. Never a second helping of pastry, that's the rule. Never a second plate of anything, really. But especially not pastry, and especially not pudding. Because to ask for more of a sweet dish is to tell the room that you've been thinking about it, and thinking about food, wanting food, anticipating food, enjoying food visibly, is the thing you're not supposed to be caught doing. Between the pastry and the fruit, there is salad and cheese, and these arrive together on a clean plate, and they are the quietest course of the meal, the course that nobody talks about afterward, the course that exists mainly to give the servants time to set up the next room, if the fruit and ices are to be served elsewhere. The finger bowls come, small glass bowls, set before each guest filled with water that is faintly warm. You dip the tips of your fingers, just the tips, and dry them on your napkin, and you don't splash, and you don't wash your hands as though you've been working in a garden. It's a gesture. A ritual cleansing of perhaps a quarter inch of skin. The whole performance takes about 5 seconds and means nothing and everything. And then the napkin. You don't fold it. That's important, and it's counterintuitive, because folding a napkin feels like the polite thing to do, the considerate thing, the thing that says I value your linen. But you don't fold it because folding it implies you expect to use it again, which implies you expect to come back to this table, which implies a kind of presumption that the evening is yours to plan. You lay it beside your plate, crumpled, used, and you leave it there. 2 hours have passed, maybe more. The candles are shorter now, the room is warmer. The faces around the table are different from the faces that sat down, softer, looser, pinker in the cheeks. The careful composure of the first course replaced by something that looks almost like ease. The conversation has changed too. It's slower, deeper. People are talking to the person beside them in a different way now, the way you talk to somebody you've shared a meal with, which is not the way you talk to somebody you've only stood beside in a drawing room. Something has happened. Not an event, not a poem, just a meal. 2 hours of small bites and careful silences, and bones left unremarked upon, and wine not drunk and bread not dipped. 2 hours of invisible effort, from the hostess and the cook and the carver and the servants in their soft shoes, and the guests themselves, who have been working, all of them, quietly, constantly at the business of making each other comfortable. And now the meal is almost over, and nobody wants to leave. That's the test, isn't it? Not whether the food was good, not whether the wine was fine, whether the people at the table, after 2 hours in each other's company, would rather stay than go. Mrs. Carrick looks around the table. The coffee is coming. The end is coming. And in a moment she's going to do something very simple and very old. And when she does it, the room is going to change. She's going to stand up. The coffee comes in a pot, dark and hot, and a servant pours it into cups that are smaller than anything else on the table, and the smell of it cuts through everything, through the meat, through the flowers, through the warm wax of the candles that have been burning since 8 o'clock and are now, some of them, guttering down to nothing. Coffee means the end. Everybody knows this. The moment the cup arrives in front of you, the meal has entered its last 5 minutes. And what happens next is the oldest choreography in the room. Mrs. Carrick drinks her coffee. She doesn't hurry it. She holds the cup, which is almost too hot to hold, and she sips it, and she sets it down, and she looks across the table at her husband once, briefly, the way she looked at him at the beginning. That small, wordless exchange that means I'm about to do the thing, and he understands, and he nods, or doesn't nod, or does something so subtle with his face that only she can read it. And then she rises, not abruptly, not with a scrape of her chair. She puts her napkin beside her plate, unfolded, crumpled because you never fold it, and she stands, and the standing is itself the signal. She doesn't say we're leaving or shall we go through, she just stands. And every woman at the table understands, because every woman at this table has seen this happen 100 times, and every one of them has been waiting for it. And some of them have been waiting for it very badly indeed, because 2 hours in a chair in a corset with your back straight, and your hands visible, and your face arranged into something pleasant is a long time, and the body wants to move. They rise with her, all of them at the same time, like something rehearsed, though it isn't, or not formally. It's simply known. When the hostess stands, you stand. When she moves, you move. You follow her out of the dining room and back into the parlour, and you do it without fuss, without lingering, without turning back to finish a conversation with the gentleman beside you, because this is the moment when the evening splits in two, and the split is clean. The men stay. That's it. That's the whole of it. The women leave, the men stay, and for a little while, of 10 minutes, 20, sometimes longer if the port is good and the conversation is loud, the dining room belongs to them and the parlour belongs to the women, and neither group is supposed to mind. I've thought about this a great deal, and I still don't entirely know what I think. Because on one hand, the separation is obvious and it's blunt and it's exactly what it looks like. A room divided by sex, with the women sent out and the men allowed to remain. And you can build an argument around that, a perfectly good argument, about power and exclusion and who gets to sit at the table after the coffee comes. And I wouldn't fight you on any of it. But then there's the other thing, the thing that's harder to say out loud, which is that the women don't seem to mind. Or rather, and I want to be careful here, because I'm reading between lines that were written 160 years ago by a woman who may not have said everything she felt. The withdrawal doesn't read in the book as a banishment. It reads as a relief. 2 hours of sitting up straight and eating carefully and never once relaxing the face. 2 hours of performing ease in a room full of strangers, with the knife rules and the bread rules and the bone rules running in the background like machinery. And now it's over, and they're walking into a room that's warmer and softer and has chairs they can actually sink into. And the corset is the same, but the posture can slacken just slightly. And nobody is watching the way they eat, because they're not eating anymore. I think the relief is real. I think it might even be the point. The parlour is quieter now. The fire has been built up while they were at dinner, and the flowers are still here. And somebody has cleared the stereoscopes and the folios and replaced them with nothing, just open surfaces, because the room is no longer trying to fill time. The time is full. The evening has done its work, and now it's coasting. Beatrice sits down. Think about what that means. She hasn't sat down, or truly sat down, in a chair that lets her back curve and her shoulders drop and her hands fall wherever they want to fall, since she left her own house. The dining chair was upright, rigid, designed for posture. This chair is different. It gives. She sinks into it about an inch, and the inch is everything. The conversation in here is different too, and I want to stay with this for a moment because it's important. In the dining room, the talk was careful, guided, shaped by the presence of men and by the structure of the meal, and by the knowledge that everything said at a dinner table is said in public permanently and can be carried home and repeated. In the parlour, with the dining room door closed and the men still in there doing whatever men do with port and politics and the temporary luxury of rolled-up sleeves, in the parlour the women talk differently. Not scandalously, not wildly, just differently. The pitch drops, the subjects widen. A woman who has spent 2 hours making pleasant remarks about the weather is suddenly, in this room, talking about her sister's health, or the cost of something, or the trouble she's having with a servant, and these are not subjects she would have raised at the dinner table. Not because they're improper, but because they're real. And real subjects require a kind of privacy that a mixed table can't provide. I don't want to romanticize this. It's still a room full of rules. You still can't say whatever you like. You still can't whisper or gossip openly or talk about anybody in the room in a way that would wound them. But the bandwidth is wider. The range of what's allowed has stretched just slightly. and in that stretch there is something that looks from a distance, almost like honesty. Mrs. Carrick moves through the room the way she's been moving all evening. Steadily, attentively, stopping to speak to each woman in turn and making sure nobody is alone, making sure nobody is uncomfortable. She asks about the drive home, about the state of the roads in the frost. She asks whether the room is warm enough. She does not ask whether the dinner was good, because asking is fishing, and fishing is beneath her, and anyway, she already knows. She can read the answer in the quality of the silence, which is the contented silence of people who've been well fed and don't want to talk about it. And now, if this is a particularly generous evening, and this one is, because Mrs. Carrick is the kind of hostess who's been thinking about tonight since Tuesday, there is the dessert room, not dessert at the table. That's one way of doing it, the simpler way, and plenty of hostesses do it perfectly well. But the other way, the lovelier way, is this. You leave the dining room entirely. You walk through a corridor, or down a short flight of stairs, or through a door you hadn't noticed, and you come into a room that's been waiting for you. Cooler than the dining room because it needs to be cool, because what's in it doesn't survive heat. Ices, fruit, cold water in crystal pitchers, and flowers, not the dining room flowers, not the drawing room flowers, a third set, a whole new set scattered everywhere on every surface, as though somebody has upended a garden into a parlour. I keep coming back to those flowers. 3 rooms, 3 sets of flowers in January, when nothing grows outdoors, when the fields are frozen and the gardens are bare earth and the only green thing for miles is the ivy on the wall of the church. 3 rooms full of flowers that were forced, at enormous expense, in glass houses kept hot by coal fires tended through the night by men who will never see the inside of these rooms. The flowers are the most expensive invisible thing in the whole evening, and they're invisible precisely because they're everywhere. If there were only one vase, you'd notice it. When there are 50, they become the air. Beatrice takes an ice. It's served in a small glass dish, very cold, and it's flavoured with something, lemon maybe, or orange, and it melts on the tongue in a way that is, after 2 hours of hot food in a hot room, almost indecently pleasurable. She eats it slowly. She doesn't have to be careful about this one. The ice is the most forgiving food of the evening. There's no wrong way to eat it. No knife, no fork, no rule about which a hand, just a spoon and the cold and the sweetness. The fruit is beautiful and deliberate. It's laid out on fresh green leaves, which are there because the leaves are beautiful against the white of the cloth and the bright of the fruit, and because somebody spent an hour this afternoon arranging them one by one, and stepped back and looked, and moved 3 of them, and stepped back again. I've seen that kind of looking. It's the same look a painter gives a canvas, the same look a woman gives a room before the guests come in. It's the look of someone who knows that the thing they're making is going to be consumed and destroyed and forgotten within the hour, and who makes it anyway, and makes it well, because that's the only way they know how to do it. There's tea now, in the parlour. Not the dining room tea, this is a different thing, a lighter thing, served from a tray that a maid has brought in on a low table near the fire. The cups are bigger than the coffee cups, and the pot is silver, and the steam from it catches the firelight and turns gold. Mrs. Carrick pours. She doesn't ask a servant to do it, because pouring tea in the parlour after dinner is the hostess's own gesture. The last personal act of hospitality before the evening opens up and becomes everyone's. She knows how each woman takes it, or she asks, and she remembers, and the cup arrives in front of you with exactly the right amount of milk and exactly the right amount of sugar, and it is warm in your hands, and the warmth goes all the way down. There's something about a cup of tea after a long meal. I don't mean the taste, though the taste is part of it. I mean the object, the way your hands close around it, the way it gives you something to do with your body that isn't performing, not eating correctly, not sitting correctly, not holding your fork at the right angle, just holding a cup. That's all. And after 3 hours of being a person who does everything right, the simplicity of it is almost overwhelming. Beatrice holds her cup with both hands, which isn't correct, one hand on the handle, the other in your lap. That's the rule. But she does it anyway, just for a second, because nobody is looking and the heat feels good. And some rules are made to be broken when the only person who'd notice is too tired to care. The men come through. They arrive in a loose group a few minutes after the women have settled, and the room shifts again. Not dramatically, not with any kind of announcement, but the way a room always shifts when its composition changes. The voices get lower. The laughter gets louder. The space rearranges itself, chairs turning slightly, small groups reforming around the new arrivals. Mr. Halford appears somewhere near the doorway. looking slightly pink and slightly pleased with himself in the way that men look when they've been drinking port in a warm room with other men for 20 minutes. He catches Beatrice's eye and she nods, and that's the whole of their interaction, because they're not attached to each other anymore. The dinner pairing is over. She's free now, or as free as a woman can be in a room full of witnesses. And now comes the rule that nobody talks about but everybody knows. You have to stay, an hour at the very least after the last plate has been cleared. Not because anyone will stop you if you try to leave, nobody will say a word if you rise and collect your things and go, but because leaving early, leaving quickly, leaving the moment the meal is over, tells the room a story about why you came. It says, I came for the food, the dinner is done, and so am I. And that's not the story anyone wants told about them, even if it's true. So you stay. You drink your tea or your coffee or nothing at all. You sit in the warm room with the flowers and the ices and the slow, gentle noise of a party that has stopped performing and started simply being. You talk to someone you didn't talk to at dinner. You look at the fire. You let the evening settle around you like a blanket, and you wait until enough time has passed that your departure says, I've had a lovely time instead of I've had enough. Beatrice's aunt is across the room, in the same dark silk she's been wearing all evening, and her eyes are half closed, and she's listening to a woman in blue talk about something that requires occasional nods. She looks tired, but it's the good kind of tired. The kind that comes from being in a warm room for a long time, not from worry. The clock in the hallway strikes something. Beatrice can't hear the number, only the sound. A deep, slow chime that comes through the walls like something underwater. The evening has been going on for hours now. The card that sat by the window in her bedroom this morning feels like something from last week. And somewhere in the house, in a room she hasn't been to yet, someone is waxing a floor. The wax is beeswax, rubbed in by hand by someone on their knees, working in long strokes across the boards until the grain disappears under a pale, glassy shine. They've been at it since this afternoon, probably. Moving the furniture out, taking up the carpet, because the carpet comes up for dancing, it has to. There's no dancing on wool. And then the long, slow work of making a floor into something you can slide across. When it's done properly, a woman in satin boots can turn on it as though the ground itself is moving with her. When it's done badly, she catches a toe and stumbles, and everybody sees, and the floor is blamed and the evening is marked. Nobody will thank the person who waxed it. Nobody will know their name. They'll go home tonight or tomorrow morning with sore knees and beeswax under their nails, and the thing they made, that perfect, gleaming, slippery surface, will be scuffed and dulled by midnight and forgotten by morning. But right now, in the room behind the flowers, the floor is beautiful and empty and waiting. The ball hasn't started, but it's about to. There's a sound coming from behind a wall of flowers, faint, muffled, the sound of instruments being tuned, of strings being plucked and tightened and plucked again. It's the most anticipatory sound in the world, the sound of music that hasn't become music yet, and it's coming from the next room, and the door is closed, and behind it people are getting ready for something that will keep this house lit until 3 a.m. Beatrice sets down her ice. The spoon clinks once against the glass, very small, very clear, and the sound disappears into the noise of the room. She smooths her skirt. She touches the ribbon in her hair to see if it's still holding. It is. The doors open and the ballroom is a different country. Everything about it is larger than the rooms they've been in. The ceiling is higher. The windows are taller. The floor, that waxed, gleaming, empty floor, stretches away in every direction, catching the light from what seems like 100 candles and throwing it back up into the room in long, soft reflections, so that the dancers, when they come, will look as though they're walking on water. The flowers are here too, but more of them, and wilder. Not the careful arrangements of the dining room or the small tight bouquets of the drawing room. These are banks of flowers, whole walls of them, green and white and pink, banked up along the edges of the room, and across a screen at one end, a tall screen covered in greenery, with blooms pushed through it at every angle, and from behind it comes the sound of music. The musicians are back there, hidden. You can hear them, but you can't see them, and that's exactly the point. The violins, the cello, the piano, all of it coming through the flowers as though the flowers themselves were making music. And there's something about that, about hearing music without seeing the hands that make it, that turns the whole room into something not quite real. The sound has no source. It just exists. The way warmth exists, the way the smell of beeswax exists, present everywhere and coming from nowhere. A servant stands at the entrance with a stack of cards and a handful of small pencils. Each card is folded in half, and on one side there's a list of dances, numbered, printed in order. The first is a march, the second a quadrille, the third a waltz, and so on, all the way down to the 21st or 22nd. On the other side, blank spaces, and tied to the card by a loop of ribbon. A pencil no longer than Beatrice's little finger. This is her dance card. She'll carry it all night. When a gentleman asks her to dance, she'll hand him the card and he'll write his name beside one of the numbered dances and hand it back, and from that moment they're bound. That dance belongs to him, and she cannot give it to anyone else, and he cannot fail to appear when the music starts because his name is on her card and her card is in her hands, and the contract is as firm as anything in the room. I love these cards, honestly. Yeah. I love the smallness of them, the seriousness of them. A pencil tied to a card with a ribbon, and a list of 20 dances, and a whole evening's worth of hope and strategy and quiet, anxious arithmetic. Because that's what a dance card is, underneath the prettiness. It's a ledger. A young woman standing in a ballroom with a blank card is a young woman who is about to find out in the most public way possible how many men want to dance with her. And a card that stays mostly empty by the 9th dance is a card she'll put in her pocket and try not to look at again. There's no rule that says every dance must be filled. Plenty of women dance every other set and sit out the rest, and that's perfectly respectable, and even recommended. The book says it outright, that dancing every single number will leave you flushed and breathless and looking worse at midnight than you did at 9. But there's a difference between choosing to sit out and having no choice, and every woman in this room knows the difference and pretends she doesn't. The march begins. It's not really a dance, it's a procession. Couples walking arm in a slow loop around the room, following the music the way water follows a channel. Nobody is doing anything difficult, nobody is performing, they're just walking together, and the room is filling up around them, and the candles are throwing long shadows across the floor, and the flowers behind the screen are trembling with the bass note of the cello. Beatrice walks with Mr. Halford, because the gentleman who brought her tonight is owed the opening dance, and the march counts. He walks the way he does everything, steadily, without particular grace, without particular error. His hand is warm through her glove, the floor is perfect under her satin boots, smooth and slightly yielding, and she can feel the wax through the sole, that faint slipperiness that makes a good floor good. The march ends, the quadrille begins, now. A quadrille is a square dance, 4 couples, facing each other, moving through a series of figures that everyone in the room has learned, and that nobody is supposed to think about. The steps are simple. A quadrille takes no more physical effort than a graceful walk, and the beauty of it isn't in the movement but in the coordination. 8 people doing the same thing at the same time, turning and advancing and retreating in patterns that lock together like the parts of a clock. Beatrice is dancing with a man she's met twice before, a friend of the Carricks whose name is on her card in a hand she didn't recognise until he stepped forward. He's tall enough that she has to look up slightly, and he leads well, which means he leads without her feeling it, which is the whole skill of leading, to make the woman feel as though she's choosing to go where she's going, when in fact it's his hand at her waist that's doing the choosing. And here are the rules, and they come fast. She will not turn down any gentleman to whom she's been introduced at this ball. Not tonight. To refuse an introduction is to insult the hostess, because it implies that her guests are not fit company, and that's unforgivable. After tonight, Beatrice may cut the acquaintance entirely. She may walk past him in the street without a nod. But tonight, in Mrs. Carrick's house, under Mrs. Carrick's roof, she will dance with any man who asks her properly, unless she's already engaged for that set. That's the one acceptable excuse. I'm afraid I'm engaged for this one. And it has to be true, because if she refuses a man on the grounds of tiredness and then dances the same set with somebody else, she has committed one of the very few acts in this room that cannot be repaired. He will know, he will see her on the floor with another partner, dancing the dance she told him she was too tired to dance, and he will draw the obvious conclusion, and he'll be right, and the humiliation of it will be entirely hers, so she's careful. She says yes to the men she wants to dance with, and she says I'm engaged to the men she doesn't, and she makes sure, absolutely sure, that when she says she's engaged, she actually is. The quadrille ends. Her partner walks her back to her seat, offers a small bow and leaves. That's the rule. He brings her back, he bows and he goes, because he's very likely promised for the next set and she may be too, and lingering is neither expected nor desired. There's something clean about it, something almost businesslike. You dance, you bow, you part, no speeches, no loitering. The music starts again and you turn to the next name on the card. Now the waltz, and the room changes. A quadrille is geometry. A waltz is something else. Two people, closer than they've been all evening, closer than they'll be again until the next waltz, turning together in a circolo that moves around a larger circle, and the music is in 3/4 time, and the floor is under them, and for a few minutes the rest of the room goes soft and distant, and all there is the turn. I want to be careful about this, because it would be easy to make it romantic, and I don't think that's what it is. Well, not always. Sometimes the waltz is wonderful, and the partner is wonderful, and the music is right, and the whole thing feels like flying. And sometimes the waltz is a duty. 3 minutes of turning with a man whose hand is damp and whose step is slightly off, and whose conversation, conducted in a low voice near your ear, is about his horse. Beatrice is waltzing with someone whose name I don't know, and whose face she'll forget by morning. And it's fine. It's more than fine. The floor is good, and the music is good, and she knows what she's doing, and there's a pleasure in that, in competence, in the body doing what it's been trained to do without the mind interfering. The satin boots slide, the skirt swings and settles, the candles go past, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. She doesn't talk much, not during the waltz. The quadrille allows for conversation between figures, but the waltz is continuous, and talking while you're turning takes a kind of breath control that only the very fit or the very vain attempt. So they turn in something close to silence, and the silence is comfortable, and the music fills the space where words would be. And there are things she must not do. She must never cross the ballroom alone, not to reach a friend on the other side, not to find a chair, not for any reason. There are always gentlemen near the door and around the edges, and a woman walking unescorted through a crowd of men in evening dress is a woman who has made herself conspicuous in a way that nothing she does for the rest of the night will undo. If she needs to cross, she waits for her partner or asks another gentleman to walk her. The room belongs to couples. A woman alone in it is a sentence without a verb. She must not run across the ballroom, not to reach a friend, not to find her aunt, not for any reason. A woman running in her ballroom is a woman who has lost control of the evening, and the sight of it, skirts flying, boots skidding on wax, will stay in people's memories long after the music is forgotten. She must not be loud. Not in laughter, not in speech. The exhilaration of a ballroom is real. The light, the music, the movement, the heat building, in a room full of turning bodies, and it pulls at you. Pulls you toward wildness, toward the kind of joy that comes out in shrieks and stamping feet. Don't, the book is very clear, be cheerful, be animated, but do not let the high spirits carry you into anything that a watching room would call hoydenism, which is a wonderful word that means, roughly, behaving like a person who has forgotten where she is. And she must not dance too many times with the same man. That rule is there for a reason that everybody understands and nobody says aloud. If Beatrice dances twice with Mr. Halford, nobody thinks anything of it. 3 times, an eyebrow shift. 4 times, and there's a sentence being composed in someone's head, and it starts with, "Did you notice that Miss Amberley?" And it ends in a way that will follow her to the next party. You know what gets me about this? It's the watching. The constant, ambient, unacknowledged watching. Nobody in this room is staring at Beatrice. Nobody is keeping count of her dances with a notebook and a pencil. But everybody is aware. Everybody has a peripheral sense of who's dancing with whom, and how often, and whether the distance between two people is closed since the second quadrille. It's not surveillance. It's something gentler and more devastating than that. It's just attention. A whole room full of people paying a very mild, very low-level, very persistent kind of attention to everybody else, and filing the information away in a place they'll never consciously visit, until the moment they need it. Between sets, Beatrice sits. She sits in the chair her partner brought her to, and she holds her fan in one hand and her dance card in the other, and she waits. The waiting is the hardest part. Not because she's unpopular, her card is respectably full, not every line, but enough, but because the waiting is public. Sitting between dances in a row of other women who are also sitting is an act of exposure that no amount of composure can entirely disguise. You're visible, you're available, and you are, for the duration of that interval, a question that the room has not yet answered. Her aunt catches her eye from across the room and gives a nod so small it's barely a movement. It means, "You're doing well." It means, "I can see you." It means I'm still here. The dances go on, the quadrilles and the waltzes alternate, and between them there are polkas, which are faster, and other things, country dances, sets that Beatrice knows from years of practice in other people's drawing rooms. Each one begins with a card presented and a name written and a small bow, and each one ends with a walk back to the seat and another bow, and the machinery of it is so smooth and so constant that after a while it stops feeling like machinery and starts feeling like breathing. Mrs. Carrick is everywhere. She's not dancing de piece. The hostess doesn't dance until every guest has a partner. And there are always more women than partners. And so she moves through the edges of the room, introducing, pairing, solving the small social equations that a ballroom produces every 6 minutes. She finds the girl who's been sitting for 3 dances and brings a gentleman to her. She finds the man who's been hovering near the supper room door and steers him toward the floor. She does it all without appearing to try, which is the thing about Mrs. Carrick that Beatrice admires most and understands least. The ability to work very hard at something and make it look like leisure. The room is hot now. The ventilation, whatever there was of it, has lost its battle against 100 bodies and 100 candles, and the air near the ceiling is shimmering slightly, and several women are using their fans not as accessories but as actual tools, moving the air across their faces with a desperation that they're doing their best to disguise. Beatrice's ribbon is holding, the pins are holding. The flowers in her hair have given up, though. Whatever freshness they had when Nellie put them in has been cooked out of them by the heat of the room, and they're limp now and warm, and she can feel them against her temple like small damp fingers. She doesn't care. Not really. Not anymore. Because something has happened over the last 2 hours, something gradual and invisible. And it's this. The evening has stopped being a performance and started being a party. The rules are still there. They haven't gone anywhere. But they've sunk below the surface the way grammar sinks below the surface when you've spoken a language long enough, and what's left on top is just the dancing and the music and the warm room and the floor moving under her feet. And here's the thing I keep circling back to about the ballroom, about the whole evening really, but especially here where the rules are thickest and the stakes feel highest. These people are having a good time, a genuine, actual, complicated good time. Not in spite of the rules, but, and this is the part I can never quite get past, in some strange way because of them, because the rules have taken all the terrifying openness of a room full of strangers and narrowed it down to something manageable. You know what to do. You know when to bow. You know when to leave. You know which dances you may accept and which ones will cost you. And inside that structure, inside that narrow corridor of permitted behaviour, there is, if you're lucky, if the music is good and the floor is right, and the person beside you has warm hands, there is joy. Not freedom, not abandon, not the kind of joy that comes from doing whatever you want, the kind that comes from doing something difficult, together, in a room full of light, and doing it well. The waltz plays again, and the candles burn lower. Somewhere around midnight, the music stops, not abruptly, it fades, the way music does when the players have been told to bring it down, and the last note hangs in the air above the flowers for a second or two longer than it should, and then it's gone, and the room is suddenly, startlingly full of silence. A march. The supper march. It begins, and the room reorganises itself again, couples forming, arms being offered, the whole slow procession that this evening has been built on, repeated now in a different key. They're not going to a table this time. They're going to a room where the food is laid out and everybody stands, and the rules are slightly looser and the air is cooler, and for a few minutes nobody has to dance. The supper room is bright, brilliantly bright, more candles than the ballroom, more light than any room needs, and it's deliberate, because Mrs. Carrick knows that a tired, flushed woman coming out of a hot ballroom wants, above everything, to be seen in kind light. And there is no kind light like an excess of it. The tables are covered with food, and the food is not like the dinner. It's standing food, picking food, cold meats and ices and small cakes and fruit and things you can eat with one hand while the other holds a glass of lemonade or water. Or if you're a gentleman, something stronger. Nobody sits down, that's the rule, and it changes everything about the way the meal works. Standing, you can move, you can turn from one person to another, you can put your plate on a table and walk away from it without anybody feeling abandoned. The rigid geometry of the dinner table, your neighbour on the left, your neighbour on the right, the person across from you, the hostess watching, all of that dissolves. The supper room is a party, not a ceremony. A gentleman takes Beatrice to supper. He must. The gentleman she danced the last set with is expected to offer, and she's expected to accept, and he goes to the table and brings her a plate and stands beside her while she eats. Because a woman at a supper table without an escort is a woman who has been forgotten, and no gentleman wants to be the one who forgot. She eats a small cake. It's sweet and cold, and she's hungrier than she thought. The dancing has taken something out of her. Not exhaustion, not yet, but a kind of hollow, buzzing energy, the way you feel after you've been moving for a long time and then stop. She doesn't go back for more, and she doesn't go to the supper room twice with the same gentleman, even if he offers. That's the rule. And the reason for it is the same reason that governs half the rules in this house. Proximity is information. A woman seen twice at supper with the same man is a woman who has given the room another sentence to write. And the supper room, with its looseness and its standing and its slightly less formal air, is precisely the place where sentences get started. Now, while the supper is happening, while people are eating and drinking and talking in the bright room with the cold food and the warm light, something else is going on. Someone is playing the piano, not in the supper room. In the drawing room or in a corner of the ballroom where the dancers have cleared away, a woman has sat down at the piano and begun to play. It might be a guest asked politely by the hostess, or it might be someone who offered. The line between the two is deliberately blurred, because to be asked is flattering and to offer is generous. And the hostess wants both things to be true at once. And the rules here are specific, and they're the ones I find most tender in the whole book. Play something you know. That's the first rule, and it's the most important. Don't sit down at a piano at midnight in a house full of tired people who have been standing and dancing for 4 hours and attempt something brilliant and difficult that you haven't quite mastered. The mistakes will be louder than the music, the effort will show, and a room full of people who wanted to rest their ears for a few minutes will instead be listening to a young woman struggle through a passage that should have stayed in the practice room. Choose something simple, something short, something that fits the room and the hour and the particular specific exhaustion of a party that's been going since 8. A ballad, a melody, something that a person half listening from the supper room doorway can follow without effort, something that floats through the warm air like a thing that belongs there. And, this is the part I keep coming back to, play one piece and then stop. Get up. Leave the piano, give it to somebody else or give it to nobody. Because a woman who plays 3 pieces, 4 pieces, who returns to the bench after she's been applauded and starts again, is a woman who has mistaken the purpose of the music. The music is not for her, it's for the room. It's a gift, a short, temporary, modest gift. And the beauty of a gift is that you let go of it. I think about that a great deal. The discipline of stopping, of doing a thing well, of feeling the pleasure that comes from doing it well and then standing up and walking away while the room still wants more. Because that's when the applause is warmest, when they wanted another, not when they've heard enough. The woman at the piano tonight is playing something I can't name, because nobody alive was there to hear it, and the song has gone wherever songs go when nobody writes them down. But I imagine it was slow. I imagine it was the kind of thing that a tired room leans into the way you lean into a warm wind. And I imagine she played it well and stopped and stood up, and somebody said thank you, and she went back to the supper room and ate a piece of cake. There's a rule about singing too. If you're asked to sing, and you may be, because the hostess is always looking for ways to fill the minutes between dances, you choose something that your voice can carry without strain. Not the aria you've been practicing all winter, the one with the high passage that you can hit about 3 times out of 4. Not tonight. Tonight you sing the simple thing, the ballad, the song that sits in the middle of your voice and lets it breathe. And you sing it once and you stop and you sit down. Because here's the thing the book understands about music at a party, and I think it understands it better than most books about music ever will. The performance isn't the point. The atmosphere is the point. A woman playing a quiet piece at midnight, in a room where the candles are guttering and the dancers are resting and the warm smell of beeswax and flowers has settled into everything, she isn't giving a concert. She's giving the room a kind of permission. Permission to stop talking, permission to lean back, permission to let the evening carry you for a few minutes without your having to do any of the carrying yourself. That's what music does at a party. It takes over. It does the work that conversation has been doing all night, filling the silence, keeping the room alive, and it does it better, because nobody has to participate. You can just listen. You can close your eyes. You can stand in a doorway with a glass of water and let the sound pass through you, and nobody will think you rude for not speaking, because the music has made silence respectable. And I think about the women who could play, really play, and chose not to, who had the Bellini memorized and the Mozart under their fingers and sat down instead and played a ballad and nothing, a tune that a child could follow. Because they understood, or had been taught to understand, which isn't quite the same thing, that brilliance at midnight is a burden on a tired room, that the highest compliment a musician can pay her audience is to ask nothing of them, to let them rest. And now the evening begins to end, not with an announcement, not with a final dance. It ends the way most good things end, gradually, and then all at once, and with most of the people involved pretending it isn't happening. The rule is this: you do not stay until the last dance. You do not remain in the ballroom until every other guest has gone, and the servants are putting out the candles and the musicians are packing their instruments behind the flower screen. To be the last person in a ballroom is to be a person who doesn't know when to leave, which is, in the whole enormous catalogue of social failures available to a young woman in 1860, perhaps the most damning. You leave when there are still a handful of dances left on the card. You slip away while the music is still playing, while the room is still moving, while the evening still has some life left in it, and you leave quietly. You don't announce your departure. You don't make a tour of the room saying goodbye to everyone you've spoken to tonight. You find your hostess, if you can, and you say a word to her. A quiet word, a brief word, something warm and final, and then you go. If you can't find her, you go anyway. You don't hunt her down, you don't interrupt a conversation to say farewell. You simply leave, and she'll know you've gone, and she won't mind, because the departure of guests is as much a part of the evening as their arrival, and a good hostess doesn't need to see each one off. She trusts that they'll go when they're ready, and they trust that she'll understand. Beatrice finds Mrs. Carrick near the edge of the ballroom, standing where she's been standing all night. Not dancing, not eating, not sitting, just standing, and still, somehow, looking as though she's enjoying herself. Beatrice says something quiet. Mrs. Carrick presses her hand and says something back, and that's the end of it. No speeches, no lingering. The hand, the words, the door. The dressing room is almost empty now. The maid who took her cloak 6 hours ago is still here, and she finds the bundle with the card pinned to it. Miss Amberley, written in a hand that was steady at 8 o'clock and is tired now, and she shakes out the heavy cloak and drapes it over Beatrice's shoulders, and the weight of it, the sudden warmth of wool after hours of thin tarlatan, is like being wrapped in sleep. The overshoes go on, the practical, ugly, beautiful overshoes that will keep the satin boots out of the frost between the door and the carriage. The fan goes into the pocket. The dance card goes somewhere. She'll find it tomorrow, tucked into a glove, or folded inside the card Mrs. Carrick sent her 8 days ago, and she'll look at the names on it and remember some of them, and not others. Her aunt is already at the door in her own dark cloak, looking patient and tired and ready. The hallway is cold now. The fire that roared when they arrived has sunk to embers, and the man who stood at the door all evening is still standing there. But his face has changed. The formal blankness of 9 o'clock replaced by the frank exhaustion of 1 in the morning. He opens the door and the cold comes in, and it's not the cold of an evening, it's the cold of a night that has been deepening for hours without anybody noticing. The gravel crunches, the carriage is waiting, and the breath of the horses is white in the dark. Beatrice gathers her skirt the way she gathered it coming in, left hand, front hem, just enough to clear the step, and she climbs up, and her aunt climbs up behind her, and the door closes, and the sound of the house goes away. The carriage moves. The hot brick is long gone. The rug is cold, the leather seat is cold, everything is cold except Beatrice, who is still carrying the heat of the ballroom in her clothes and her skin and the flowers in her hair that have been dead for hours. She leans back. Her aunt says nothing. The lamps of the house go past the window one by one, and then the trees, and then the dark, and the carriage is on the road is quiet, and the night is enormous. Somewhere behind her, the music is still playing. She can't hear it anymore, but she knows it's there. Behind the flowers, behind the walls, behind the frost on the windows, and it will go on for another hour, maybe 2, and then it will stop and the candles will go out and somebody will sweep the wax floor and somebody will take down the flowers and somebody will fold the tablecloth with the bone mark still on it, and by morning the whole evening will be a memory that 20 different people will remember 20 different ways. The road is worse going home than it was coming. The ruts have frozen harder, and the carriage finds every one of them, and Beatrice is too tired to brace against it the way she did on the way here. She lets her body move with it, the way a sailor moves with the deck, and her aunt does the same on the opposite seat, and neither of them speaks, because there is nothing left to say that wouldn't sound foolish after an evening like this. She thinks about things, not the grand things, not the rules or the etiquette, or the invisible machinery that held the whole evening together. Small things, the sound the hooks made when Nellie fastened them, the first smell of the hall when they came through the door, the way the soup tasted, that first spoonful, after an hour of standing and pretending not to be hungry, the floor under her boots during the waltz, so smooth it felt like the ground was helping her turn, the bone on the tablecloth, the woman who found the worm and said nothing, the maid who pinned names to bundles of wool at 8 o'clock and is probably still unpinning them now, in a corridor at 1 in the morning, handing dark cloaks to dark figures in the dark. Mrs. Carrick standing at the door, standing. For 7 hours, standing near a doorway and smiling, and never once sitting down, and never once letting the smile falter, and never once looking at the clock. Beatrice thinks about that and decides, quietly, privately in the dark of the carriage, that she does not envy Mrs. Carrick, but she admires her. She admires her with a kind of exhausted awe that is perhaps the truest thing she's felt all evening. The town comes into view, a lamp, a wall, a gate she recognises, and then her own house, dark except for one candle in a downstairs window and left by somebody, probably the cook, probably hours ago, and it's burned down to almost nothing, and the light it gives is barely enough to see the step. The carriage stops, the door opens, the cold is absolute. Beatrice gathers her skirt one last time and steps down, and the gravel under her satin overshoes sounds exactly the way gravel has sounded under every woman's shoes who has ever come home from a party in the middle of the night. She goes inside. The hall is cold and dark and smells like yesterday's fire. Her aunt goes up first, slowly, holding this banister. Beatrice follows. In her room, the fire is out. The bed is still turned down the way it was when she left 6 hours ago, in another life. The china dish is on the table by the window. The card is gone. No, it isn't. It's in her pocket or her glove. She'll find it tomorrow. She sits down on the bed and begins to take out the pins, one by one, slowly. The sound they make coming out is quieter than the sound they made going in, and each one goes into the saucer on the nightstand, and the pile of them grows, small, bent, warm from her scalp, and the hair falls section by section until it's all down, and her head feels lighter than it has in hours. The flowers come out. They're dead. She puts them on the table and doesn't look at them. The gloves come off. The boots, the dress, unfastened by her own hands now because Nellie is asleep and Beatrice can reach most of the hooks herself, and the ones she can't reach she'll leave until morning. She gets into bed in her shift. The sheets are cold and she pulls the blanket up and the cold presses against her like a second skin, and then, slowly, her own warmth begins to fill the space. And the cold retreats, and she is warm again. She thinks, I did everything right. She thinks, nobody will remember what I was wearing. She thinks, good, and the pins are still in the saucer, and the dress is over the chair, and the candle in the window downstairs has gone out tired, and the house is dark, and the town is dark, and somewhere, a mile away, the last carriage is leaving Carrick Court, and the flowers behind the music screen are beginning to drop their petals onto the waxed floor. And the floor is scuffed and dull, and nobody will ever see it in its perfect state again, and Mrs. Carrick is sitting down finally for the first time in 7 hours, in a chair by a fire that somebody has built back up, and her shoes are off, and her eyes are closed, and the pins are out. They are in the saucer where they belong, and Beatrice is asleep. So that was the evening, the whole of it, from the card on the table to the pins in the saucer. And I want to sit with you here for a moment in the quiet after it, because I think something happened tonight that's easy to miss if you're only counting the rules. What happened is that 100 people walked into a house and spent 7 hours taking care of each other. That's it. That's the whole evening underneath the etiquette and the wax and the flowers and the 4 wine glasses lined up in a row. 100 people, most of whom didn't know each other well, some of whom didn't know each other at all, agreed, silently, without discussion, without being asked, to carry each other through the night, to not notice the bone on the cloth, to not mention the hunger, to look at the flowers when somebody needed a moment to recover, to listen gently and to differ gently, and to leave while the music was still playing so that nobody had to be the last one in the room. None of it was easy. None of it was natural. Every bit of it was learned and practiced and maintained at a cost that nobody talked about, because talking about the cost would have been another rule broken. And I keep thinking about the people we didn't see. The cook, who started at noon and finished at 1 in the morning and never once came through the dining room door. The carver, whose hands didn't stop for 7 hours. The maids in the dressing room, pinning names to bundles of wool, standing on their feet in a hot room, smiling at women they'd never met and would never meet again. The man at the front door, the man on the stairs, the person on their knees with the beeswax, making a floor so perfect that nobody would think about it at all. Those people held the evening up. Every shining hour of it rested on their shoulders, and their names aren't in any book, and nobody thanked them, and they went home in the dark, and the next morning they got up and did it again. That's always the way, isn't it? The people who make the world beautiful are almost never the people the world sees, and I don't know how to fix that. I don't think anybody does. But I think it's worth saying here at the end of the night before you fall asleep, that every evening you've ever walked into, every warm room, every laid table, every lit candle, somebody's hands were behind it, and you probably didn't see them, and they probably didn't mind. If any of that stayed with you tonight, a moment, an image, a small strange rule you can't quite stop thinking about, I'd love to hear about it. You can leave a few words below whenever you like. Tomorrow or next week or never. There's no hurry. This is what we do here, you and I. We walk through old rooms and sit at old tables and listen to music that nobody alive has heard. We go slowly, we stay a long time, and we try, as best we can, to notice the people that history forgot to notice. There are more of these evenings coming. We'll go further back. We'll walk through kitchens in medieval castles and sit at the tables of ancient Rome and follow the sounds of music through centuries that left no recordings. Every time the details will be different. The flowers, the food, the language, the light. And every time underneath it all the same thing will be happening. People taking care of each other in the ways they knew how with the tools they had. If you'd like to be here for those evenings, you're welcome. You can follow the channel, and another night like this one will find you when you're ready for it. And if not, if tonight is enough, if this is where we part, then thank you for walking through the house with me. Thank you for staying. The fire is low, the room is warm, the road outside is quiet, and the frost is settling, and somewhere in this town a young woman is asleep with her hair down, and her pins in a saucer, and her dance card folded in a glove. Sleep well.